Recently, I made my 50th episode of my Minecraft Let's Play, which also coincided with reaching 2,000 days played in my world. Nearly. It's close enough, right? That translates to nearly 19 full real-life days, or 450 hours. Basically, a really long time. So today, I'm going to be recapping and showing you all everything I've done in that time. I hope you enjoy. So here we are in episode 1, where currently right now my character is actually not in the new world. I was having problems with my skin loading in the first episode. Hence why I am Alex, so just try your best to ignore that bit. But we spawned in here just on the outskirts of this jungle biome on a stony beach where of course I did the usual thing of punching some trees and collecting the first few resources. Once I had all of my tools, I was able to find a coral reef biome, which I couldn't really do much with at the moment in time, but I made a note of it to come back to later. I did also get a little bit stuck at nighttime, had a few sketchy moments, but I was fine and didn't die in the first episode, thankfully. For a while, my food source was fish, but that was depleting, so I had to resort to using kelp, so just harvested a whole bunch of it here. I stuck around beside the ocean and got tons of good loot from all of the shipwrecks and other bits and bobs I found just hovering around in the water, and got stung by a pufferfish in the process. Serves me right for stealing, I guess. I kept exploring and eventually stumbled across this nether portal ruin just in the middle of this super cool land formation, which actually ended up being part of my current base. This mountain range is what I now live a part of. There's tons of buildings which we'll see transformed over the course of this video, but it's very pretty. There are lots of glorious peaks and snowy hills, all with just plenty of building potential. I was very excited to start placing blocks here. So I was just having a general look around the near vicinity, checking out the nearby village as well as any other cool bits and bobs, generally just kind of looking for ideas of what I could build here. I wasn't planning to build anything too extreme in the first episode, so I just made this small cave my temporary home for now. There's also this giant hole in the middle of this area, which of course was going to be a perfect start for a mining trip, so I headed down to the caves to gather some resources. I found my first diamond, which was pretty cool, and I fought off various mobs, all somehow not dying in the process. Stumbled across a lush cave, which was my first time seeing this biome in survival, which was super cool. And I made it safe and sound back up to the surface, where of course I had to climb the giant waterfall, but I made it, and luckily didn't die. My mission then was to go on a bit of an adventure, not only to explore the rest of my world, but primarily get some leather and a good food source, hence all of the steak and leather on my hotbar. Eventually, I was able to get enough paper and leather to make 15 bookshelves so we could get some sort of enchanting in the first episode, which is always a great thing to do. And just for now, I built it inside of the cave, just as a temporary solution until I built something better. And just like that, I was done with the first episode. We had made some progress, and come the second episode, we were ready to do some building. Luckily, I'm back to my normal skin now. So my main goal for this episode was mainly to build my starter house, and of course I had to gather all of the resources first of all. Eventually, after plenty of resource gathering, I managed to gather up pretty much everything I was gonna need. And so I was ready to start building, placing down all of these blocks, building the first building in my entire world, which was very exciting. This house was a fun one to make. And here we have the finished product. Still probably one of the favorite builds I've done in my entire world. It's very quirky and I love it. So the outside was done, but the inside was not at all finished. So I went to work and did a whole bunch of stuff. There wasn't anything too crazy inside of here, mainly just everything you would need in a starter base, a food source, enchanting, storage, and a bedroom, that sort of thing. It wasn't anything crazy, but it was nice and cozy for a starter house, I think. I also had this room at the top where I planned to get a librarian, specifically a mending villager, so that's what was next on my to-do list. Not before moving my dog into position in his new home, which is also my home. We share builds, it's fine. So to get the librarian, I of course had to do the old method of breaking and replacing a lectern a whole bunch of times. I ended up moving him in position where I could actually do this technique inside of the base so I didn't have to move him afterwards, and in the end, I finally did it. I got the elusive mending trade. So by the second episode, I had enchanted gear, mending tools, and a pretty cool starter base. For episode 3, I had more building ideas in mind, but the first thing I did was go mining and I actually found this skeleton spawner, which eventually we would turn into some kind of farm. However, whilst I was down in the cave getting lots and lots of diamonds, I was unfortunately blown up by a creeper. My first and one of 2 deaths in this series. So after a quick trip through the caves, I was able to re-find all of my gear and thankfully didn't lose anything in the process. So now I could get on with building, and of course it was time to gather a whole bunch of resources. This time, most of it was just trees. I had everything ready to go so I could start the build, which was actually a mega bridge, which I'm currently building up now, which bridges from one side of the mountain to the other so I could easily traverse across this gap in the land. Again, this is one of my favorite builds in this entire series. Seems to be a running theme with the early episodes that I did. Some of my best building in my opinion, but this bridge was awesome and such a fun project to work on. Makes for a lovely walk across too. I did also begin to think where I could build my proper main survival base, which would eventually be at the end of the mountain range right there, surrounded by all of the peaks. But that would have to wait for another episode. For right now, the bridge was the main focus. There was this villager house right in the way, so had to get rid of that one. I also decided to let the waterfall that was previously here start cascading down again through the bridge and go underneath it. It did, however, need a little bit of terraforming work, which I would come back to at a later stage because the next thing I worked on was actually building that skeleton farm because XP is always needed in the early game and one of these are super helpful. The last thing I did for the episode here was name my dog, who goes by Clifford. In the end, I actually got rid of the waterfall and decided to come back to it at a later point in time when I could build something else there. Come episode 3, I was pretty tired of running around everywhere and decided it was now time to get myself an elytra. I also did a lot of mining off camera in between episodes, which I just had to show off to everybody. So of course, before we go to the end, we had to go to the nether to get some blaze rods. I did end up having a very close call and nearly died, as you can see here, mining away bone blocks, not paying attention, falling very, very close to the lava. That was a little bit scary. But eventually I was able to find a nether fortress and a pretty large one at that. It was over a lava field, but thankfully I had a bow so I could just snipe the blaze really. In the end, that got boring and I decided to just go ahead and find a blaze spawner and killed a whole bunch of them basically. I then killed a bunch of phantoms to get some slow falling potions, some endermen for some ender pearls to find the end portal where I went through it, and of course fought the ender dragon, that long hard fight which everyone has seen a million times, so I didn't take up that much video time and yeah, I killed it. It was done. Woohoo! Of course, the next step was to go end raiding, and I got a whole bunch of shulker shells, these elytra, plenty of dragon heads, and I made it back safe and sound. With the ability to fly, I now headed out to a faraway desert biome where I was planning to build a mob farm. This thing was pretty huge and very, very ugly, hence why I'm building it so far away from my main base. There was no way I was going to cover this up with a pretty looking build, at least definitely not at this point, so I just put it far away so I wouldn't have to look at it all the time. But as you can see, it was super efficient. I was getting tons of drops, which meant I could craft a whole bunch of firework rockets and fly around freely with my brand new elytra. I mean, just look at that thing go. It is efficient. I also did a little bit more trading with some librarians in a local village and saw if I could get some cheap books. This one was an Unbreaking guy and made very good use of him, let's just say that. Got tons of books from him. I also found a good use for my new supply of string and stringed a whole bunch of my builds so the snow would stop falling on it all. Episode 4 was finished and episode 5 was time to start building my mega base. For those who don't know, my mega base is single-handedly my favorite build I've ever made in Minecraft. I'm super proud of it, so I remember this being a very fun episode to make, and you guys seem to really enjoy it too. Of course, I had to do plenty of resource gathering beforehand, which started with needing lots of prismarine, so needed to raid a prismarine temple, or ocean monument, whatever you call this thing. I did also manage to get myself trapped in a 2x1 hole with mining fatigue and nearly got myself caught for a very long time. Thankfully, after lots of breaking with the pickaxe, I was able to make it out, but Note to self, don't block yourself in with an ocean monument and Elder Guardian nearby. It never ends well. Eventually, I did manage to kill them all, which freed me up from getting that mining fatigue, and I was able to harvest all of the prismarine that I was going to need for the build. Which was not loads, but I wasn't going to be able to get this without killing the Elder Guardians. I collected the rest of the resources and began building on maybe one of my favourite time lapses I've ever made. This build has a lot of good qualities to it, but the actual building of it was maybe my favourite part. And just like that, my mega base was done. This beautiful creation was something that took many weeks in the making. I spent a long time in my creative world actually planning this, let alone the time spent building it, but all in all, well worth the effort. Now, of course, that was just the exterior. The interior was yet to be finished, and here's how many days in Minecraft it took to actually complete the interior. I'll let you count the suns and the moons if you really want to. But I turn it into a very nice living accommodation with plenty of storage, a nice homely center part when you actually walk into the build, a long line of furnaces to do all of my smelting, and of course, a bedroom. The final thing to do was just to stock my fish tank with some tropical fish, so I headed to that coral reef biome I found in the first episode, and brought them back inside of my lovely aquarium. Bit of a downgrade for those poor fish. The last thing I did for this episode was a little bit of organization. I took a whole bunch of signs and moved all of my resources and just kind of sorted everything out. Very monotonous, but it's a task you gotta do in Minecraft. It makes it worth it in the long haul. Come episode 6, I was still gushing all about my new survival base, but today the plan was to make a new build on top of this mountain peak, which would actually be an observatory, a purely cosmetic build. It was going to have no sort of function, it was just going to be something that looked cool, which I think it did a pretty good job of looking cool. I did want to give it some sort of use, so my plan was to actually make this bottom floor a map room, then I could update the map over time and see how much progress I was making. But first, I made some smaller maps in the end, mainly because they look pretty cool and weird. Like that. It doesn't look like something normal, it looks like something out of space. Almost, which is why I put them in the top part of the observatory, almost like it was photos the telescope took of galaxies somewhere out there in the universe. And then I made the big map on the bottom floor, which was looking pretty bland at that moment, but over time it got a lot cooler. And it was nice to kind of just be able to walk around on top of this thing and get a good look at my world. I was done with building for the episode and eventually decided, let's go to the Nether and see if we can get enough Wither Skulls to fight the Wither. Which I was able to do, and I wasn't about to fight this Wither properly. Who do you think I am? I just wanted the Nether Star, so I tried to cheese the method of actually killing it by putting it under the end portal. Long and behold, it didn't work. I was following the wrong tutorial and karma bit me right on the bum and I had to kill this thing for real whilst flying around the end, not really prepared to actually fight the Wither. It took a little bit of time, but I was able to do it in the end and got myself my Nether Star while sustaining quite a lot of bruising from the fight. It was tough, but I made it. I crafted a beacon, which now meant I had access to Haste 2, which is the only thing I really ever use a beacon for, so next time I wanted to do some mining, it was going to make it a lot easier. So there we are, 4 builds down, and we're only at episode 6. For the next episode, I had some plans of a bit of a different build and something that I was really looking forward to making. I wanted a better source of XP, something more than just my skeleton farm, so I had the idea of centering it all around the plan of using a furnace to hold XP and then collect it all at once and get a ton of it. You know how furnaces do that. I was making a furnace XP farm basically. I needed to dig a big hole to make the farms underground, and of course I put my beacon to good use and started chipping away at all of these blocks, carving out a massive area to build 2 very large farms inside of it. Very large might be not very large depending on who you are and how much you play this game, but to me, digging a hole this big and building farms inside of it meant big farms. I was making a cactus farm for one, that was going to be the item that got smelted in the furnace. And then I was also making a bamboo farm, which was going to be used as a flying machine harvesting method. I would not have done this if I had known how many problems it was going to cause me in the future, but alas, I was none the wiser at that point in time. But I had my farms complete, so I was ready to actually build the XP machine, the nice looking part of it, out on the surface. The last block, the furnace. That was going to be what stored all of my XP, and as you can see, the actual machine looks pretty cool. Very futuristic, steampunky a little bit. I was happy with the simplistic design of this, and the fact that everything was going to work just made it that much better. Spoiler alert, over time it didn't really work, but it did for a bit, and it made me happy at the time. So the cactus would continuously feed into the furnace, and so would the bamboo, and it would basically smelt that up indefinitely, and to get the XP, I could just take out the green dye like that, and harvest everything that was stored inside of it. It's a cool design. It just has its flaws with my lack of redstone expertise. With the XP farm built, I then moved Clifford into his new home, which once again was my new home. I placed him out on the balcony since that's where he decided he wanted to sit down. For some reason in the next episode, I decided I wanted to make a honey farm, so I collected all of these bee nests that I stocked up in my chest, and I was ready to start building a bee factory. This was the first build kind of towards the bottom of the mountain range. My plan was to kind of build all over the entire biome, so of course I had to kind of get a good coverage of everything. This was the first build that I wasn't perfectly happy with when I made it. I had some weird parts of it that I wasn't too sure if I would like or you guys would like. In the end though, over time it grew on me, and I actually really love this build now, but at the time I wasn't too sure. It is a little bit weird looking. Eventually I would find out that would be a running theme for my build style in this world. They are all kind of weird builds that I make here. But I decorated the inside and was ready to actually start building the bee farm that was going to be a part of this thing. Of course it required digging out yet another hole, not quite as large this time, and I made said bee farm. I then had to move all of my bees in position. I did not have that many at all, so I had to get a whole bunch of flowers to actually breed them up. Got a little bit stuck on this ladder here. All of my bees tried to escape. Silly little things. They had to get back down here and enter their beehives, which eventually, after lots of breeding and some more building, I was able to do that. As you can see, they're all down there making their way into the farm. Slowly but surely, they all got inside. I then used the very expensive bee nest block to actually decorate the farm. These things are not cheap to get a hold of, and just to use it as an accent block was maybe a little silly, but I think it made the farm, or build I should say, look that much better. Good improvement, I would say. I then went back to the XP machine and did a little bit of tweaks that I troubleshooted in between episodes and made it work a bit better. Again, in the future it would break, but I made it work and it was flowing nicely. I was getting lots of XP from this thing. As you can see here, I grabbed the green dye and go up 8 levels from barely any smelting at all. And I mended all of my tools. I did have a ton of green dye that I didn't really know what to do with, so I made some sort of lava dispenser that it would just automatically eject into, then I didn't have to worry about it. And just like that, we were done with the episode. For episode 9, I had 2 main things that I wanted to achieve. One of them was to build a nether portal, which I'm currently in the process of doing right now. Wanted to make something a little bit cooler than just sticking 10 obsidian inside of a wall and calling it a day. This one had a nice charm to it. The other thing that I wanted to get done in the episode was to head into the nether and get some netherite armor. And tools, of course. I was also able to link my nether portal up to the bedrock ceiling, something I always like doing in my worlds. It just makes it so much easier to actually get around up here. But I crafted some TNT and I took a trip down to the bottom of the nether and started to blow everything up. After lots of explodification and much mining of netherite, I was able to get everything I wanted for the entire episode. So I was able eventually to get full netherite armor and tools. In between episodes 9 and 10, I did some end raiding off camera, got a whole bunch of tools, armor, and lots of supplies, a whole bunch of goodies, but that wasn't really related to the main episode. My main plan for this one was to actually get a good supply of villagers, so currently right now I'm building up a villager breeder, although it may not look like that because this just looks like a tower. which is exactly what it is. It's just the cover for the villager breeder, with the village breeder itself actually made inside of the tower as well as partially underground it. I then had to do the super fun task of moving the villagers into position. Now I didn't have a village nearby, so I had to scour around for some zombie villagers. Eventually I found some, and it has its difficulties. I always struggle with doing this, something usually goes wrong, but eventually I was able to move the villagers into position after I got them cured, and the breeder was ready to go. Not before building an awesome mini train track ride for the baby villagers to take into their holding cell right after they were born. At least they got a little bit of excitement before living a life of eternal torture and slavery. Fun times. So the idea was the villagers would make the babies and it would get picked up by the minecart at the top, take them down the rail and chuck them off right at the end there into that holding pen, which worked nicely for these three guys. And that was everything we achieved for episode 10. Look at that little guy go. For episode 11, I was finally ready to actually do something with the build that I had envisioned to go underneath our big wooden bridge. I was going to make a farmer's watermill of sorts. The idea was I would use the waterfall to power this watermill that could actually churn up some crops on the inside. Or something like that. I don't know. I make up most of this stuff half the time. But I built a lovely little build, one of my personal favorites yet again. And of course, I had to make the windmill actually turn, at least in theory. So I released the waterfall to go back to where it was meant to originally, with that terraforming actually in position. So it cascaded down the mountain, under the bridge, and through the watermill, looking as though it all had some sort of function which could do something on the inside. I then brought the waterfall all the way down, on past the watermill, cascading down into another waterfall that was going into a small little pond which I had yet to build. As you can see, it kind of just stops there for now. But I did a very simple terraforming job, nothing too crazy. I tried to keep my terraforming in this world pretty simple. I don't really want to do too much, then it gets very monotonous and detaily, which I'm not a big fan of. So this simple cave, which was eventually was at one point in time my starter base, is now a cool waterfall cavern. I did want to give my watermill some sort of use other than just looking nice, so I decided to build a farmer's crop farm, if that's what you want to call it. Basically one of these things that you shove a villager underground inside of and they just harvest crops forever, where a hopper minecart goes underneath and picks up all of the drops that they can't fit inside their inventory. So I made use of my villager breeder and brought one of the grow up villagers into the watermill itself, where I could put him in the farm underground and he would work away indefinitely. He did escape, however. I can't say I blame him, but eventually I managed to get him in position where he could work away forever and ever. And there we go, another build done over the mountain range. At this point in the series, I was really enjoying building whilst also making farms, so I decided to combine yet another build and farm design. This time I decided to build an iron blacksmith, so I was making the smithy building right here that was also going to have an iron farm working away down underground. Pretty happy with this one. I especially like the lava pump outside. I did a little bit of interior decorating just to furnish everything up nicely to make it actually look like a blacksmith of some kind, and I was ready to start on the iron farm itself. So I built the actual farm itself, all of the blocks at least, and the redstone placement, and all I have left to do was to move the villagers and zombies into position. More fun. Thankfully, the villager part was no problem at all. I had a good supply of them by this point in time, so I just had to move a couple of them over. And when I say a couple, I think it was actually 8 in total. But once I had one track set up, it wasn't too bad at all really. The thing that was difficult was getting the zombies into position. I had so much trouble with these guys, they just refused to go into place, when eventually they just kind of fell in naturally. Not that one though, he's not meant to be there. The one with the iron helmet is. The farm wasn't ready, but iron golems kept spawning, so at least I knew the spawning mechanics was working. I just had to finish everything up. At long last, the other zombie made it in and the farm was working. Iron was being supplied to the chest and I was getting a whole bunch of it, which made me super happy. Having a good supply of iron is always helpful to have on hand, especially when you can just get it automatically without having to do anything, other than slave away over moving zombies and villagers, which took a really long time, but definitely worth it. For episode 13, if I remember correctly, I was quite short on time for recording this episode, so I didn't do a whole lot. The first thing I did do was make a hoglin farm so I could get a really good and super efficient supply of pork chops, and I could get rid of the bread that I was eating. Just from 5 minutes of AFKing, I was able to get several stacks of pork chops and a little bit of leather on the side. But then I was ready to build something that looked a little bit nicer. This is my lookout point and a nice place to go in my world if I just want an overview of the mountain. So we have this spiral staircase leading up to the top bit where I could come and stand and just kind of gaze out at my world. After that, I did a little bit of custom tree building just around my survival base area to get an idea of what I wanted to do with the whole mountain range. I had some time left in the episode, so I decided to go on a little bit of an exploration mission, where I stumbled into a lot of drowned, and one of them actually gave me their trident. I only had to kill 113 drowned, so was it worth it? I'm not sure. But I did take that bad boy home to enchant, and it took several attempts, but I eventually got something I was happy with. Mainly so I could do this. Really fun. Highly would recommend. For the next episode, I decided I wanted to make yet another farm. This time it would be sugarcane. I had had enough of harvesting all of it by hand, and I wanted to make something a bit more automatic. So once again, I dug out another big hole and built a much better sugarcane farm underground. But of course, I wasn't just going to leave it as that. If you've learned anything by now, or if you've watched my videos before, you'll know I like to link my farms up to an actual proper build. That's a recurring theme in this world of mine. So currently, I'm making a greenhouse. That's a little bit more steampunky than a usual one, but it does look pretty cool. Very pretty with all of the leaves on the inside too. I of course planted some crops and flowers to make the whole build feel that much greener and actually look like it was doing something that a greenhouse would do and hold plants and flowers and such. But of course the main use of it was to just link it up to the sugarcane farm underground, which by this point was being very efficient. The next thing I worked on was the pathway designs. I wasn't going to build anything in my actual world, but I did want to ask you guys on which one you liked the best. Eventually, option C would go on to win. Then all I did for the rest of the episode was just a little bit of cleanup, like getting rid of the remains of the village. Didn't really want to keep that around for the long haul, making the path blocks into actual grass blocks, and basically wiping it off the map other than that one poor farmer villager. Oh, and then this super weird thing happened with my sugarcane, and all of the water went, but not the sugarcane, so that was nice and satisfying to break. And of course, what else do you do with a lonely farmer villager other than just piston push him all the way up into the sky so you can get a glorious sunset view of the surrounding area? I bet he loved it up there. For episode 15, I had this really cool idea to build my own minecart railway that I could ride, and not just all of my villagers. I wanted to make a train station that was linked up to a train track that would go all the way around my base, or at least most of it. So once I built the thing and shoveled all of the snow off my roof, I was ready to build the actual track, which as you can see, I made a start there in that tunnel. I was taking some inspiration from the previous track I built for the villagers and wanted to kind of keep with the same style, just maybe not quite as detailed. So I finished up the tunnel, which would end up being the final point of the ride and take you back into the station. But of course I had to plot out the map for the rest of the ride, so I used that with my map and kind of just figured out where I wanted to go and what builds I wanted to go past. In the end, I decided to hold off for another day and actually put the train track project aside and instead build a guardian farm. I know, that took a bit of a left turn, but I think I needed this to actually build something in the future. At least I think that was what it was, if I remember correctly. So I spent a long time building this big old thing, which is a super efficient and honestly quite easy to build guardian farm, at least in comparison to draining out an entire ocean. And just like that, we were done with the episode, ready for next time to actually build those train tracks. Incorrect. This episode, I decided to not build the train track and instead do something else. I promise we do get to it at some point in time. In this episode, I decided I wanted to upgrade my super smelter into a proper super smelter as opposed to just a long line of furnaces. I had to go to the nether for something, and for some reason this donkey followed me through, and he kind of followed me everywhere in the world. He was like my unofficial pets. We had a mutual bonding and agreement. So I thought, hey, let me bring you and your pig friend back through to the overworld and help you out a little bit. Well, that was a mistake. The pig was fine, but Mr. Donkey, he suffocated in a wall. It was very sad. But life goes on, so I got back to building and made the building that was going to be covering up my super smelter, or at least the facade of it. And this was the finished product. Some cool design here, wacky colors, and yes, don't worry, we did eventually actually change the windmill design to something that looks a lot better. There was also a minecart track that kind of worked its way around the build itself. It wasn't exactly meant to be ridden, but here I am. And sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. It's a little bit hit or miss, especially if you're in the cart, and if you go in unloaded chunks, it's not the greatest, but it's fun when it's actually up and running, and a cool little feature of a build and some nice movement. As you can see, look at the cart go. So with the building on top made, I then constructed my super smelter, which I believe is 32 furnaces long, plenty for all of my needs, and just generally better than the 10 or so that I had before. That of course I had to manually load and couldn't just get the minecart to do it for me like this one is here. And last but not least, of course, for this episode I had to end off by making a grave for Nether Donkey. I said a nice couple of words about him, shared some fond memories we had together, and then we said a very sad goodbye for the end of that episode. But it's okay, because in the next one we finally got started with our railway track, going all the way around my base, and here's the design of it. We went part by part, building one section at a time, kind of traversing through the mountains and eventually making it all the way round back to the tunnel and to the train station. Unfortunately, I can't show you the whole ride in this episode. I think I did in the video where we built it, so it's episode 17 if you want to check it out. But it takes a long while to go around, and it's just a nice relaxing overview of my world, which I like to take a ride on from time to time just to kind of experience everything I've made through the form of this railway track. The rest of the episode mainly consisted of a few bits and bobs and stuff that I've been meaning to do for a while around my world, so nothing really noteworthy. But we built a cool roller coaster track, which I think is plenty. Today's plans for episode 18 were simple. I wanted to do some terraforming and landscaping all the way around my base. Not after a short roller coaster ride, of course, it's mandatory at this point. So of course I revealed which pathway won the vote amongst all of you, and partially myself, I had to agree with you guys and like it myself, and as I said previously, pretty much everybody said this one, the one with all of the stone. I did change it up slightly by switching out tuff for some other blocks and incorporating calcite and diorite into it, but it was virtually the same, and I did that connecting up all of the builds that I currently had in my world. At least all of the ones in this general area, not going quite all the way over to the starter house and bridge and watermill. I didn't really want to commit too much before actually building over the entire thing, so I thought if I could just do this small snippet and see what you guys say, I can expand after that. But of course we had to build some more of these custom trees, which by the way are designed from King Z. These are revolutionary in my custom tree making. I hate building custom trees, but these are super easy to make, so cannot recommend that enough. King Z, check them out on YouTube. But I felt like with all of these trees and the pathways built and a few other bits of terraforming and landscaping and touch-ups that I did around the base, it was finally starting to look like just something a whole lot better. Terraforming and landscaping and adding trees in makes a real big difference to a build, in my opinion. I mean, just look at the stark contrast between the area with trees and the area without trees over there. Much, much better. Of course, I had to update my map to see what it looked like on there, which is pretty cool, honestly. We had some time left in the episode, so I decided to raid a Bastion Remnant. Didn't really need anything from there, I just felt like it would be cool and something I think I'd only done once before in Minecraft. But I got a nice bit of loot, including some more ancient debris, a lodestone, a whole bunch of gold, and just some other goodies here and there. Come episode 19, I wanted to start a new building project that was going to take multiple episodes, and it was all centered around this giant hole that I had at the bottom of my base. I was going to turn it into a big mining area and sort of mini civilization almost, and to start off with I just built some rail tracks going from one side of the mountain to the other. I would eventually build more stuff down there, but that was all I was doing for now. I did also discover whilst I was in this area, anytime I was nearby, a whole bunch of glow squid would spawn and just kind of die at the bottom of that waterfall. So I had a nice supply of glowing sack for a while. I then built a crane that was going to be lifting ores from the bottom of the mines all the way up to the new building that we were going to make, which was the sorting building. I did have to oxidize a whole bunch of copper for this build, which is always a really joyous process. Placing these down 4 blocks apart takes a while, but it's definitely worth it because they are very pretty. So then I started work on the sorting building for all of the ores. The idea was that the ores would get brought up from the bottom of the mine with that crane there onto the conveyor belt and taken inside of the building where they could be sorted into various piles with different ores going in different directions. And yes, the farmer villager is still there up in the sky. I didn't have all of the ores I needed though, so I did have to take a quick trip to get some more actually in ore form that I could build with. It took a while because some of them are rarer than others, but eventually I managed to find everything I needed. And I was able to watch the sunset on another world with another build done. When episode 20 came around, I was able to start work on another lot of buildings that were going to be going in the mining project. This one, as you can see, needed acacia. So the first build that I made was actually the coal sorter, I believe. This is where all of the coal, in theory of course, none of this actually did anything. It was all purely cosmetic, but this was where the coal was going to go. So I had some fun with the design of it, kind of stacking this coal up in a nice little pile and making some sort of conveyor belt system into stone cutters which could cut it all up into refined coal. I was kind of just making everything up so it looked like it was actually doing stuff when in reality it probably doesn't make a tiniest bit of sense. But it was fun to just add in some other details and kind of just think how would all of this work if I was being very lenient on my realism. So I was just adding in a couple of like workbenches and smelters and other sorts of stuff just to kind of fill the room with things. But with the coal building done, I then started work on, can you guess, with the colors? It's lapis and redstone, hence all of the blue and red in the build. I believe the idea with this one was the lapis and the redstone were going to be some sort of liquefied product, as though they weren't actually, you know, redstone dust or whatever lapis is, I guess a stone. I was going to pretend they were some sort of liquid, so I was making some vats underground that they were going to be filled up with, and some sort of purifying station. Again, I'm just making all of this up off the top of my head. But we had 2 more builds done in the mining area, and it was really starting to take shape. For episode 21, we were back at the mining project doing some more building, but first of all, I had to move this villager out of the way. He was kind of ruining it a little bit. Not that it's any fault of his own, but I thought I would relocate him, so I built him a balloon house just nearby the observatory and observation deck. He didn't say specifically that he didn't want to live in a balloon house, so I can only assume that he did. I transported him up there using a whole bunch of dirt and rails, and every now and again I go back and check on Carl is his name, after Up of course, and he seems happy enough in his balloon house. Don't you, Carl? Look how excited he is. Of course I had to get rid of the ugliness that was the dirt bridge and leave Carl up there in his home, where he wasn't talking to me at that point in time. I'm not really sure why. But with Carl dropped off, I was able to do some more building over here at the mining project, and this time we were going to be working on the iron, gold and copper building, I do believe. Of all of the builds in this area, this one is probably my favourite, mainly just because I really love the shape of it. I think it all came together very well, but the block palette and everything else is pretty nice too. This one, I believe, worked in the same way as the coal building. There might have been some other technicalities that I mentioned in the video, but the gist of it was all of the blocks were chucked on a conveyor belt and grinded up by a stone cutter. I also have some fun with armor stands, as well as the armor stands tweaks from vanillatweaks.com. That's why you can see a shovel and a pickaxe hung on a tripwire hook. I get a lot of comments asking about that quite often, so yeah, that's a data pack from Vanilla Tweaks. And just to end off the episode, we went back to check on Carl, and look at him, he's happy as ever. He loves his new home. You guessed it, for the next episode, we're once again doing some more with the mining project, not yet touching the bottom of the mine hole that we have, if you want to call it that, but instead we're starting work on the diamond building, which is this one right here. Doesn't look like anything too special. I think in comparison to the rest of them, I prefer the other ones more, but this one didn't really need to be that massive, as it was just for the diamonds. Possibly emeralds too. Again, it's been a while, I can't really remember exactly. But of course, we're doing some more things of just kind of making up random machines that look as though they're doing something. I think the idea with this one is that you would kind of move the ore around on the chain and kind of push it against the stone cutters and carve off little bits of rock to expose the actual diamond. Something like that. And in the middle, I made some sort of workbench using the Armor Stands book to display some tools and an actual diamond block in the middle. Yep, very expensive detailing this is. And then over in this corner, I believe I built what is some sort of polisher. I think that was the idea anyway. The end rod was meant to spin or something in theory and make the diamonds nice and shiny. As well as building just a couple of other details on the other walls too. Now, I was missing one crucial element to this build, which was actually a regular stone diamond ore block, which, if you didn't know, since 1.18 is an extremely rare find. Diamonds only really generate on the deep slate level nowadays, so finding them in the stone level is kind of difficult because there's a very fine line between deep slate and stone, so I kind of just searched around in the caves as well as doing other mining, just gathering up a whole bunch of supplies whilst I was down there in search of for that diamond. I ended up finding this water cave, which actually was like the perfect level between deep slate and stone, and I believe this is actually where I found it. And there it is, hidden away just next to all of that deep slate. We actually got two of them, which is awesome. So I had to use one of them for the build and I saved the other one for a rainy day. But I got a whole bunch of other supplies, which is great, always handy to have on hand. I broke down all of my coal and copper and decided to just chuck it into my super smelter and see how much I could get from it. It's always very satisfying to use this thing, watching the items come through the water streams. But then I was able to place down my very difficultly earned diamond ore block, which was going in place of that deep slate one there, which was just a placeholder. So that building definitely had one of my more expensive interiors. For episode 23, we started another build over here for the mining project, but first we made another crane. This one was a little bit smaller and in theory was how people were transported, not ores. We also built the storage hall, at least I think that's what this was, basically where all of the items and ores would go once they had finished and been put into their final form. So the liquefied lapis and redstone, the gold and iron and diamond blocks and all that sort of thing, it was going to be stored in that building. So pretty much I just stacked up a bunch of the blocks into little containers like that and built a couple of other things as small details and fun little gimmicks almost around the open areas of the room. After that, I decided to work on the rail system to, in theory, how the ores would actually get around from building to building, starting off at the sorter, going to their individual building, and yes, I actually connected it so it would make sense. Inside of the sorter building, we have a bunch of conveyor belts with those grindstones, and they come out of these doorways, and those would go to the individual buildings, so it was all kind of connected in a way that made sense. So now we had a bunch of rail lines that connected all of the buildings together with the exception of the storage room, but we were going to tackle that at a later date. We started episode 24 by realizing the XP machine was no longer working. The flying machine had broke in the bamboo farm, so it was basically pointless. And so I decided to build something a bit better. The classic Enderman farm design all the way in the end, which is super easy to make and insanely efficient if you just want a whole bunch of XP really quickly. So now I was able to quickly resupply and mend up all of my tools. And that allowed me to have a good set of gear to start work on the bottom of the mining project down in the cave here, where it was a mess. There's blocks everywhere. Part of the village is down here with that path block and it was just not very neat. So the first thing I did was actually a whole bunch of terraforming, making the waterfall actually turn into some sort of river and flood part of the cave, and I just kind of neatened everything up and made it look a little bit nicer down here. And then after some more building, I made a whole bunch of decorations down here so it actually looks like a proper mine shaft with some mines all connected up with some more rail lines going over the little river that we built and all coming into a center spot that would get taken up by the crane almost directly below where we built it. It doesn't quite link up, but That's fine. You got to use your imagination with this sort of stuff. As you can see, it doesn't quite line up with the one above. That was the main gist of it, but after that I decided to build just a couple of other details and smaller things like carts and wagons and lanterns and a little eating table there and some TNT, which I'm always deathly afraid of. That one time my creeper just blow up and ruin everything, because that is a lot of TNT that would be rather destructive, but all in all, I think this came together pretty nicely. Episode 25, I can't really recap that well. It was a world tour episode. I tried to, with my series, do a world tour every 25 episodes. I think it's a nice recap point for new viewers to kind of catch up on and then continue with the next episode. So episode 25 as well as episode 50 are world tours, but if you want to go back and have a look at the first 25 episodes, what I've already talked about in this video in a bit more detail, that might be a good video to watch. The next episode, we were back to building, this time heading to the Nether. I wanted to make something a bit better than just a single Nether portal on the roof of the Nether. I wanted to make some sort of hub. I needed a lot of quartz for the build that I was going to be doing, so I headed out into the Nether wastelands and got a whole bunch of it, which allowed me to create a Greek temple inspired nether hub all centered around my nether portal, which was now 4 nether portals, purely for symmetry though. And this looked a whole lot better than just a single portal in the middle of nowhere. My plan was to link all of my nether portals in the nether up with speedy pathways using soul sand, but for that I needed soul speed boots, so I thought the easiest way to do that was to actually barter with these piglins. So I gathered up some of my gold, pretty much everything I had, and bartered with these guys and gave them all my worth. After several goes round, I was able to get enough Soul Speed 1 books, I believe it was, and 1 Soul Speed 2 to combine them all and give myself Soul Speed 3. So that meant I could run super quickly along Soul Soil. I built these pathways connecting up my nether portals with prismarine on the side. I had plenty of that, so I thought it would be a good block from the Guardian farm, of course, and soul soil in the middle, but there were mobs spawning on top of the soil, so I needed to cover it up with carpet. Hence why I went to my mob farm and took every single string that it had. I crafted a whole bunch of carpets and just started placing it along to make the entire nether roof spawn proof, so it was a safe haven for me to get around. At this point in my world, I didn't have that many builds I needed to get to through nether portals, so I didn't need that much linking up, but I did have some time left in the episode, so I decided to build a moss farm. Which on top of said moss farm that was built underground, I made this lovely moss tower. With a room that I nicely decorated with, of course, moss, what else? And if I ever needed a whole bunch of this stuff, I could just turn on the machine, let it work for a while, and I would have more than whatever I'm going to use it for. It's really, really efficient. And that was it for episode 26. By the next episode, I was ready to continue with the mining project and actually finish it off. We had all of the buildings done and the railways connecting them, but it was missing quite a lot of details and just generally finishing touches. So first things first, I smelted a whole bunch of bricks and made a brick and granite pathway leading round to connect up all of the buildings. Already it was looking much nicer. After that, I went round and added various details like these vats or containers and some wagons and other bits of detail just to make the whole build feel that much more alive and as though stuff was actually happening here and it wasn't just a bunch of buildings all kind of placed next to each other. And with those details added in, already it was looking better once again. I also had some of these bigger wagons which you saw me building, and that was kind of in theory how the items and blocks and finished ores got to the storage building. Since we didn't have a railway system, I just imagined they got there via carts, big ones at that. I did feel like our miners or people working here didn't really have anywhere to stay, so I made a very small campsite just off to the side with a lot of tents on show. I chucked in a couple of other details and I felt like I made a nice little living accommodation for them. The final thing to do was to build some custom trees to bring it all together. I made some birch tree variants and I made some oak tree variants. And once I built all of them, everything felt very much so finished as though it had come together pretty nicely. I did have an open gap beside the mining project and the waterfall and also the greenhouse that just felt super empty. So I made a nice little waterfall with a little pond at the bottom. And then, of course, there was an obligatory cinematic overview of everything we'd built. I had lots of fun working on this project. For episode 28, I decided to build something behind this waterfall. We had this natural generated hole behind it, and I felt like I just had to do something with it. So I started by building a super futuristic looking tunnel that eventually would lead to a piston door. Which, of course, I built by scratch. I'm making this up definitely by myself. It's certainly not a mumbo jumbo tutorial, no way. But now I was ready to build the room itself, which the idea for this is it was some sort of futuristic bunker slash hiding space. I don't really know what it was. It was just a fun little idea that I had and I wanted to roll with it. So I brought my open empty space and changed it into something that looked a lot better. As you can see, we decorated the walls, the floors, the ceiling, and just had a big open room ready to decorate. I built a bed, of course, plenty of storage. I built dispensers that look as though they do something, and a map that I eventually would fill up with something, and of course a big screen at the front with fitted CCTV so I could keep an eye on the outside. I had made enough maps of my base, so I thought I'd just go off out in the wild and make a map of a cool piece of terrain, so here it is. And of course, I had to try out the CCTV, so I went inside, made one final check outside before turning on the cameras, and everything was working. I had multiple cameras set up so I could change which point of view I was looking at, and it was all very high-tech and futuristic, and definitely not just clever editing. By the time it was the next episode, 1.19 was finally out. There was a whole bunch of stuff that I wanted to get to, but my main aim for this episode, episode 29, was to fight the Warden. Or more specifically, try to not die to the Warden and raid an end city. Spoiler alert, it didn't exactly go to plan. But after a while of searching around, I was able to finally locate an end city, or at least the start of one with all of this skulk. And then I got a glimpse down this cave and spotted some deep slate blocks which definitely were not naturally placed. So of course I set my spawn and did what any sane Minecraft player would do and dove near enough straight into the ancient city. And now it was time to be stealthy, crouching around everywhere, absolutely shaking in my boots. I have never felt fear in Minecraft like this. The first time I raided one of these cities, it was exhilarating. I'd highly recommend this episode. I think it's super exciting to watch and tense, and yeah, it was scary, definitely. I carefully stepped around the entire city, looking for loot and being careful not to make a single noise. I thought I was in the clear, but I was not. It turns out I didn't really understand Skulk Shriekers, and I set off one of the alarms. Unfortunately, I then set off the third alarm after just getting the second one, and awoke the Warden, and we had a face-off. It was terrifying. I thought, if I just don't move, he's not going to see me, right? I thought, he's blind, he can't see. Turns out he can smell. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. So eventually he sonic boomed me, I fell down here, swiped me again, and I was dead. That's how I died for the two of second time I should say, in my world. I hurried back to the spot that I died at, whilst also summoning more wardens on the way through because I wasn't really being quiet enough. But thankfully I managed to get back to the tower and regain all of my stuff. I then took a bit of a different method of flying around crazily in and out of the ancient city and kind of throwing stealth out of the window. I would locate a chest, open said chest, and then fly away very quickly before the Warden could get me. It was a pretty good method, and I actually got quite a lot of loot from it. I got the Swift Sneak books, which was the main thing I was looking for really, so I could have what is now one of my favourite enchantments in the game. I don't think I could live without it. So that alone made it worth it, and just the whole thrill of exploring the ancient city for the first time being genuinely terrifying to play Minecraft. It was a lot of fun. For episode 30, 1.19 was still very fresh, so I went in search of a mangrove swamp, which I actually found this one pretty quickly, but the trouble is, it's tiny. I wanted to do some building in this new biome, and that wasn't going to cut it. I did chop down some of the trees so I could get some of the wood and the propagules, and discovered how annoying it is to chop down mangrove trees. I came across a pillager outpost in hopes of finding some allays, but that doesn't work. Alas, I didn't see any. And it was after that when I discovered a much larger mangrove swamp and could finally explore this beautiful biome that wasn't just 50 blocks by 50 blocks. I searched around for a while for a good spot and eventually found something where I could start building. And the first thing that I was going to make was a mangrove biome swamp mansion, I guess would be the best way to describe what this is. It's just a big old mangrove and mud brick house at the end of what would eventually become a small mangrove swampside village. Inside of the mansion, I wanted to put some frogs in there instead of making it just a regular mansion, but I wanted one of every single frog type. So I did some research and eventually managed to breed up one of every frog type by spawning them in different biomes and letting them grow up, and it would change their color. It was a pain to do and transport them that whole way across, but eventually I managed to get all 3 frog types moved into their new home. In the next episode, I decided to start work on that riverside mangrove swamp village. Of course, it was going to be made out of a lot of mangrove wood and mud brick, so I had to unfortunately chop down a whole bunch of mangrove wood. It was such a pain, but it was kind of necessary for the build. I also found this bit of cool terrain generation just stretching all the way across the desert. Once I was back at the mangrove swamp where I was building, I whipped up my first design for what I wanted one of these house/mangrove huts to look like. Very run down, kind of dilapidated, a bit all over the place, not very clean looking, but I think that's very well suited to what I was going for. So of course, I whipped up some more of them, placed all alongside the riverbank, varying in shape and size. And after that, I added in some bridges so you could get from one side to the other easily enough instead of having to go all the way around, including this bridge that if you went under on a boat, you would just duck for some reason. Very strange. I then went round and furnished all of the homes, nothing too fancy, just so it looks like someone lives inside of here. And the last thing to do, of course, was to breed a frog army, which eventually I would just let roam free into the mangrove swamp, increasing the frog population. There was no real need for it, I just wanted to have more frogs running around my mangrove village. This was a really fun small project to work on where I could build a custom village in just a single episode. I love building villages, but sometimes they take too long. This was a nice middle ground. In the next episode, I decided to do something with the remaining frogs that I had left over at my base where I was breeding some of them up. So I decided to attach them to a leaf and bring them down to the floor, which didn't go that well. Not all of them survived. But eventually I dropped them off at this pond here, and nowadays they're just happily swimming around enjoying themselves. These two, well, let's just see what happened with these two, shall we? I was trying to help them, drop them down to the bottom, and well, that one's dangling as you can see. He died. And this one, I believe, died on the way. I can't remember exactly. But I gave them a nice little home, which they are very happy in. Now, it was time to head back to the mangrove swamp and actually to a nearby regular swamp biome where I have a witch hut which I was going to turn into a witch farm. I was constantly running out of redstone in my world and needed a proper supply, so this witch farm was long overdue. Of course, once I built the farm, I had to make a non-spawning area around it, so I got rid of all of that land and changed it up for water, whilst trying to make it look somewhat natural, which I think I did an okay job at. Of course, I had frogs on the mind, so to cover up the witch farm, I decided to build nothing other than a giant frog. It's a bit of a weird build, I know. This is actually a design from Gold Robin that I slightly modified. Looks just like him, right? It's actually pretty cool. It is a bit of a weird structure just to have in the middle of the swamp though. It does cover the farm up nicely. And at long last, the witch farm was done, and it's kind of efficient. It's okay if I only need a little bit of redstone. At some point in my world, I'm probably going to have to build something a bit better. For episode 33, I started work on a mega build of sorts that was going to take up my time for the next few episodes. But first, I actually started by showcasing my brand new method of chopping down mangrove trees in what I feel like is the most efficient way possible without going absolutely above and beyond. Here you can see me doing it in fast motion. I'm basically just going right down the middle and only harvesting the center planks, and then regrowing trees and doing it all over again, leaving that eyesore on the world, so do it far away. But I was doing that so I could gather a whole bunch of resources in these shulker boxes to start work on the build, which is actually my villager trading hall, which is going to be taking place on this island right beside that ruined nether portal just at the bottom of the screen that I found in the very first episode, which is what brought me to my base in the first place. So this episode was mainly about planning and just getting a good structure and shape down for what I wanted the build to be, just so you guys could see the size of this thing and understand that it was going to take me a while to actually make. Then, unfortunately, because it was a little bit of an eyesore, I got rid of the ruined nether portal. I love that thing, but it was kind of ugly compared to what we were going to be building here, so it had to go. Now, of course, the villager trading hall needed villagers, so I connected a super long rail line leading from my villager breeder all the way over to this new villager breeder where I could make some more and populate said villager trading hall that we're currently building. Once I brought the two villagers over, I gave them some food and they got to work, and they were populating villagers in the background, and I was getting ready to build the rest of the build. So for the next episode, it was time to make the trading hall itself, at least as far as the exterior is concerned. We weren't moving the villagers in just yet. In between episodes, I spent quite a lot of time AFK, letting my villagers do plenty of breeding, which, as you can see, they did a pretty good job at. Now, of course, I needed some more supplies, a lot of mangrove wood for one, so I had to go on a resource gathering trip and get even more blocks. And then I started work on actually finishing the outside of my trading hall. This build is one of the larger ones that I've done in my world, and I was really happy with the finished outcome. I love the block palettes here. The black, the white, and the red I think all go really well together. That was only the roof. We still had all of the walls to go. And I started work on them shortly after that. Lots of stone, a little bit of spruce, and some glass stained windows, which you might be able to see. Has a villager face in it. Did you get a glimpse? Just a cool little detail, and had lots of fun with detailing and texturing this build, and altogether, I think it came out pretty well. Now that was only the top part of the build done. We still had all of this mud brick down here which needed some texturing and added detail, so I went along and did all of that just to make it look a little bit more interesting instead of just a blank line of tons and tons of mud brick. The final thing I did for the build here was to make a bridge. As you can see, this bridge leads all the way over from the land to the island where we have our trading hall, which is how I'm going to be accessing it once the interior is done. I did do a little bit of work in this episode, mainly just getting the walls and the floors and the ceilings done, ready to basically build the actual trading hall itself in the next episode. So alas, it was time to make this big building into an actual trading hall in episode 35. The actual trading hall design part where the villagers are staying is not my design. I tried for a very long time to see if I could build something myself that I had purely come up with on my own. I couldn't do it. Long story short, I encountered problem after problem and eventually decided to go with another, which I can't remember who it's from originally. I'm very sorry. You'll be able to find out in the actual episode. So once one level of these were done, I started moving the villagers into position, which actually was pretty smooth. I had this rail line in place and it was pretty simple. It was just get one villager, move him in place, he would automatically be shut and locked in, and rinse and repeat basically. It was the smoothest villager moving I've ever had. Then I duplicated what I already had onto another level up because I wanted more of these villagers. But we weren't done there because I wanted to get really cheap trades, and for that you need a zombie to basically kill and then you cure the villagers over and over again. A little bit mean, I know, but it's kind of necessary to get the cheapest trades. I then tore down the villager breeder because I didn't need it anymore, and I decided to build the same again on the second level to get a whole wide range of a bunch of different trades. So now was the time-consuming process of letting the zombies eat the villagers, curing them, and basically doing that a whole bunch of times to get really cheap trades. I was here doing a lot of this for a while. It was worth it in the end though, because I got a whole bunch of easy emeralds and other items that I can trade for that I wouldn't have been able to get that easily without this trading hall. So it was a lot of time and effort that went into it, but worth it, I would say. With the trading hall now done, in episode 36 I was ready to do something not quite as massive. I always use flowers in my builds, and I thought it was long overdue that I build myself a flower farm. So what I'm making in this episode is a flower farm with a lovely flower cottage on top of it. I started by building out all of these levels, as you can see, before segregating them off with walls, all cobblestoney and dilapidated, so it looks nice and old like every cottage should. The plan was to have a bunch of flower fields in all of those sections, but of course I first had to build the overgrown cottage itself, and then I could place in all of the too high flowers, making this large colour array, which is just beautiful to look at. And of course I carved a path through the middle so I could actually access the cottage. I did up the interior, of course, with mainly just storage for all of the flowers that I was going to be getting, and then I built my flower farm, which is of my own design, and that was mistake number one. You see, I built this thing not really understanding flower mechanics, so basically it only makes like 3 types of flowers out of the 10, 15, 20 plus that there are. So at this point in the video, I was sad because this farm took a while to design. As you guys know, I'm not that great with redstone, but also it was just a lot of work to put this whole build all together for it to be completely pointless, at least as far as the actual farm goes. Of course, we still had this beautiful cottage with its flower fields on the surface, so it wasn't for nothing. But I will remember next time I need to build a flower farm to actually follow a tutorial. In the next episode, I decided to build a farm that wasn't my own design. I was very quickly running out of gold in my world, not only from the bartering, but also all of the golden apples that I needed to cure my villagers. So supplies were limited, and I decided now would be a good time to make a proper gold farm. And so I gathered up some supplies and headed to the Nether. I built the classic donut variation of this farm. I believe this is from the Psycraft guys. I could be wrong. They've done some sort of variation. But this donut design is always super efficient and just cranks out gold like it's nobody's business, along with a serious amount of XP. And so it was ready for testing. I actually killed the first piglin so it didn't set off the chain reaction that the farm needs. I did a little bit of a tamer shot the second time round, and they all came charging, hoping to dear life that it was going to work and they weren't just going to all charge me. But thankfully I built it correctly. They couldn't get through and they were dying instantly in the stack of minecarts, and I was getting so much XP and so much gold, which needed better storage. And this part was actually my own design, which I'm pretty proud of, because gathering that many blocks all at once is actually kind of hard to do when you just have hoppers. But thankfully I figured out a solution to spread out enough so it didn't all back up and get clogged. And of course I had to do a full-blown test run, an AFK session for a few hours I think, I can't really remember. I wanted to get a whole bunch of gold, and I also got a whole bunch of levels too. 250 to be exact. Way more than I need. But it meant I could craft some more golden apples and go about curing some more of my villagers, getting even better prices to do even more trading. In between episodes, I was doing even more AFKing, getting all that gold and all that XP, getting me to level 575. As well as, of course, a stupendous amount of gold, but today we were back in the overworld doing something a bit more fun than just building a gold farm. I flew to my local sparse jungle, which is a spot I'd been eyeing up for a while, where I was going to be building a jungle pirates themed inspired village. Starting off by building a small boat where the pirates crashed into the shore on. Then doing some terrain modification, making it look a little bit more interesting, covering a lot of it up with dirt and adding in some texture and slabs and stairs. Before building some cliffs, adding in a beach, and just generally making the surrounding area look like an amplified version of what was already there. As you can see, here is the before, and here is the after. I then decided to decorate the beach part of the build a little bit, so I built some palm trees and just added a couple of bits of detail on the beach itself, like a treasure dig site for example, and a villager cage, which for some mean reason I decided to actually put a villager inside of it. I struggled though, as you can see. It's not easy. Eventually, I did it after some very quick placing, and my zombie villager was now ready to be cured and trapped inside of that cage forever. After that, I built a couple of huts just dotted around to get an idea of what I wanted this village to look like, but I felt like it was missing one finishing touch. And that was a skull banner, which requires a wither skeleton skull to actually craft. Thankfully, I got one pretty quickly. And look at that. It finally feels like a pirate village. I wasn't able to complete the entire village in a single episode, so in episode 39 we were continuing on with it. And the first thing I built was a custom volcanic island out at sea. And at this point in time was entirely floating on the surface of the water, which wasn't gonna fly. However, before I remedied that, I wanted to bring some turtles over to this island, so I breeded some up and snatched some turtle eggs. I also decorated the island with some bushes and palm trees, just so it was more than only the volcano. And whilst I was waiting for the turtles to hatch, I monotonously placed a whole bunch of dirt under the water so it actually looked like a proper island, not just something that was floating on the sea. Of course, that was just a dirt mound when the island had a lot of sand on the shores, so I went round and covered it up with a sand block on every single dirt block, before bone mealing all of the sand so it blended in with the rest of the ocean and all of the seagrass that's on it. I was still waiting for the turtles to hatch at this point, so I decided to grab some campfires and lava and actually make our volcano a smoking volcano. It was now active and looked awesome. At long last, the turtles did eventually hatch and we had a finished, turtle-infested volcanic island just off the shore of our pirate village to be. In the next episode, I was going to be building the actual village, and I wanted villagers to be a part of that. So I set up a villager breeder and got 2 of them in position. I got them in place, covered them up, gave them their food, but they just wouldn't breed for some reason. So over the course of time, I eventually decided maybe we won't be having villagers in this village, so I think those 2 are still there now. But for the meantime, I left them breeding away, producing 0 babies, whilst I went ahead and built some of the huts. So I gathered my supplies and placed a bunch of huts and houses dotted around the sparse jungle. Again, similar to the mangrove village, all varying in shape and size. I then went round and added in some details to a couple of the houses, like this one here is some sort of tool maker for the village, and another one has a crop farm, and another one has a chicken coop. You get the idea. After that, I went round and built all of the pathways into the ground connecting up all of the huts, before building a bridge that would cross over this open cave that is a big safety hazard to all of the villagers living here, so much safer now. I then went round adding in a bunch of other small details, as well as some bamboo shoots, which eventually I decided I didn't really like, so I got rid of it, and we were left with my finished jungle village. Come the next episode, we just had one final thing to build in this area. And that was a bigger version of this pirate ship, so the pirates living here could actually get away. I was trying to tell a little bit of a story with this entire build, and it went something along the lines of a small group of pirates crashed onto the shore here in their small boat, and instead of just instantly sailing away in a ruined ship, they set up camp, built the huts, and kind of made it their home for a while, and over the course of time, slowly chipped away at building this massive pirate ship, a huge upgrade for them, so eventually they could leave the island. It would have been a good reason to explain why there were no villagers on the island or in the village. Unfortunately, the ship is still there, so that kind of has its plot holes. But I decorated the deck of the ship, adding in some cannons and cannonballs and a bit of storage here or there, all piratey ship sort of stuff, as well as a very weird steering wheel. After that, I turned the under deck of the ship, which I forgot the name of again, I do this every time, and turn it into the living quarters for all of the pirates to sleep in whilst they're out at sea. I then built a very small and quick bridge connecting the ship to the land, where on the land I built several things, all sort of indicating the building elements of the ship. So we have something that could have made the flag, something that could have been wood to actually build parts of the boat, a crane, wood just kind of stacked up on the side, all various items that look as though they've gone into the creation of the ship itself. And that was the Pirate Jungle Village Volcanic Island Pirate Boat all done. This was a 4-episode project to work on, and I had lots of fun with this one yet again. It was something a bit different to usual, and I really enjoyed myself. For episode 42, I wasn't doing any building at all. Instead, I had a plan to raid every single structure in the game. I put together a long list of all of the structures that I wanted to raid, starting with the small ones, the medium ones, and the large ones, and I was going to go around throughout my world and raid them all. And that's what I did. One by one, I raided all of the structures, rating them on difficulty, loot, and enjoyment. And I was going to rank them at the end of the video. Of course, some of these took significantly less time than others, such as the Desert Pyramid. They are everywhere, and over time they would kind of get more and more difficult to find and also raid. When it came to raiding the Pillager Outpost, I did find one with 2 allies in, so I made a note of that to come back to later. I still keep meaning to do something with them in my world. Not only was this episode pretty fun to do, just raiding and adventuring is a fun part of Minecraft, but I also got a whole bunch of loot throughout the course of this video, tons of stuff that I wouldn't usually be getting unless I went on these expeditions. But in the end, I raided every single one and ranked them in this table. Desert Well came at the bottom. That was always going to be the case. It's just a desert well, and at the top was Ancient City and End City, tied for 26 points. So now you know, at least in my opinion, what I find to be the best structure to raid in Minecraft. In the next episode, I found myself once again wanting to build another very small custom village, this time in the Mesa biome. I had an idea to build a whole bunch of very small cuboid houses varying in color, stacked up just like this is one very small compacted village. So of course I had all of my blank stone blocks, which I then turned into some very colourful terracotta blocks, and we finally had something that started coming to shape. I then took multiple walks around the village, quote unquote, it doesn't really look like it at the moment, to try and figure out the best place for all of the doorways and how we could actually traverse the village over and through the houses without really invading anyone's space, and something that seemed kind of feasible if this were to be a real place. With the route decided, I did a quick mock-up on one of the bottom houses just to get an idea of what all of these could look like. Nothing too extreme, but little details like an awning, a window, some buttons along the top, very Adobe styled. You get the idea. This was kind of the blank slate for what the rest of them were going to look like. So I went round to every coloured house, which is, by the way, all 16 terracotta colours here, all 16 houses, one of each colour, and I decorated them in a similar style, which really turned it from just a bunch of different blocks stacked up next to each other into something that kind of looked like a proper little place to live. So the houses were done, and after that I decided to work on the pathways a bit and kind of smoothen out the terrain so that you could actually walk to and from every single house and access it in a reasonably easy way. After that, since this was an oceanside village, I decided to build a small docking station, as well as some stuff for fishing on the side, another smaller docking station, and then, of course, some diving boards so I could jump off into the ocean. And that was the village all done, which is definitely my favourite small village we have in this world. It just feels very unique. Episode 44 came out around Christmas time, hence the Christmas texture pack and Christmas jumper that I'm currently wearing on my skin. I wanted to do a Christmas themed build, so I headed to my nearest ice spikes / ice plains biome and decided to pick out a spot to do something in. My plan was to build a giant snow globe, which is this thing right here. Made out of all of that glass, we had a giant sphere in the sky ready to build something inside of. And what better to build other than a cozy log cabin? All we really had left to do was to decorate the surroundings of the log cabin, so that wasn't the only thing on show. Not before doing the interior, of course. We had to get that done too. And how could I not hang up some Christmas lights as well? As for the surroundings, all I really did was build a couple of Christmas trees, which are actually just regular spruce trees with the Christmas texture pack on, so they have tons of lights inside of them. I built a couple of candy canes too for that extra Christmas feel. The final thing to do was to grab my snowman here and get a whole bunch of snow layers so I could add a little bit of variation into the height of the snow inside of the snow globe, so that if a giant came along and picked up our snow globe, we could actually have some falling snow. This was a very festive build. It was nice to do at the time of year. A bit weird to look back on now though. It felt like it had been a really long time since I built anything by my base here. So in this episode, I was going to be building a wool factory. And here it is. It's actually based off of a small model that I found on Pinterest. As you can see, there's definitely some similarities, minus some creative changes that I've made on my own accord. But yeah, I based it off of a little miniature, which is something I've never done before. Of course, with this build, I do the same as I always do with any sort of cosmetic build that I'm trying to make look as though it has a function. I built a bunch of stuff to make it look like something is going on inside of here, from furnaces to piping to machines and conveyor belts on the outside, all sorts of random little bits and bobs that come together to make it look like an actual factory. Now, of course, this wasn't just a cosmetic wool factory. We were actually going to be building a farm underground, hence why I dug out this big old hole and started work on the sheep farm, which was my own design. Pretty proud of this one. It's not that hard to build a sheep farm, but I like how this one turned out anyway. I got all of the sheep into position, and all I had to do now was link it up to some storage. So I made a collection area, built a storage room with color-coded chests holding up all of the different colored wools that we were going to be getting. And then I sat back and watched my creation work. It's a very satisfying farm to watch function. I did also add a couple of other bits on the outside, such as that minecart track that's going in and out of the factory, as well as a staircase you can get from the bottom of the build up to the top where my starter house is. And of course, even more custom trees. In episode 46, we were once again heading back to the Nether. This time to build a blaze farm. I often find myself needing blaze rods for various reasons, and I'm always in short supply, so I thought it was long overdue that I actually make one of these. I found the spawner that I wanted to use and started work on the actual farm, all whilst being pelted with blaze balls in the process. So the main farm itself was built. It was actually functional, but it didn't look very good, so I decided to add a small structure below it so it wasn't just floating there, and I think that really tied everything together, as well as covering up the top bit here to improve on that even more. I tested out the farm for a while and got a whole bunch of blaze rods, way more than I need, and I was actually going to use some of these for my super smelter, which was really handy too. Did a couple bit of decoration with some blaze heads and also made a way up to the actual bedrock ceiling. And I also changed up the entire nether fortress here, at least for this part, so it was with even numbers instead of odd numbers, so it was symmetrical with the rest of the farm, minus that spawner in the center. Still bugs me, but it's better than what it was before. Now, time for episode 47. We're getting close, we're very, very nearly there. In this episode, I was going to be building probably one of my biggest builds I've ever done. As you can see, we're back here at where I spawned into this world at the Stony Beach on the outskirts of the jungle biome, and I wanted to build a spawn monument of sorts. Of course, I had to start off with a whole bunch of resource collecting, including mining deep slate, which is never a good time. But eventually, I got pretty much everything I needed to actually build this thing. And so construction started and finished on the spawn monument. This thing is massive. It's definitely the tallest build I've ever done. Not sure about the biggest in number of blocks, but it's pretty massive and quite frankly looks epic. It does a really good job at being a monument. You can see this thing from pretty much anywhere as long as there's enough render distance. But now I of course had to do the interior. We were going to do something inside of here instead of just leaving it blank. After I lit it up of course, so I wasn't going to be killed by any sort of mob. I didn't do anything too specific in here. I basically made a room at the bottom where I'm still working on what I'm going to do in here actually. I never came to a final decision, but the main thing was just for now some mob heads on display on these little grindstones so they kind of look like small statues. But the real purpose of this monument and the bottom room was to build a bubble column so you could easily get up to the top without having to fly. So the monument was done, but the outside area was looking pretty bare. I felt like it needed some more green, so I transformed the entire island, or this section of it, into moss. However, it didn't feel like it was enough, so I grew some azalea trees and made some sort of stone sort of remnants on the floor, as well as a couple shrine sort of structures. I wanted this to feel very ancient to walk around, and it really does. I think I've portrayed that pretty nicely with this project. So yes, this is once again another build that I am extremely happy with. The next episode, I wanted to do some housekeeping, some general chores around my world that I've been meaning to get to for a really long time. I even made a to-do list. The episode basically consisted of me going around my world, sorting out all of the things that I've been meaning to get to for a really long time, some of them even since when I first started playing. It was super satisfying just to get all of these little tasks done and just kind of set aside an episode to go around and do all of them at once. I'll be honest, I procrastinate a lot when it comes to the not so fun tasks to do in Minecraft, so making a video out of it made it seem worthwhile. Also, fun fact, this was the first ever video where I did an ad and had lots of fun making it. But eventually, minus a couple of things, we were able to tick off just about everything off of our list. It felt like a very productive day. And soon enough rolled around episode 49, where we were doing one of my favourite projects I've done for a while in this world. The plan was to transform this mushroom island into a multi-biome roller coaster island. It was pretty ambitious, but I had my sights set on an idea that I really wanted to create. The first step was to section off all of the biomes and where they were going to be going, as well as changing out the blocks that were going to be on the surface of them. So the snow had, or the taiga had snow, for example, and the mesa had red sand. You get the idea. I then took down all of the borders and started to blend them together just a little bit before starting work on all of the biomes. So I made the mangrove swamp, I made the forest, I made the mesa, I made the jungle biome, and I stopped there for now. Mainly because I had to psych myself up to build the mountain biome, which is going to be going right in the center. I was making some custom mountains, which I've never really done before, and I was pretty happy with how they came out. I'm no expert. But once all of the biomes were there in their natural form, or at least best I could replicate, I decided to go round and build a whole bunch of details. So I had some beach huts and a boat by the beach, a small trading center with a wagon nearby in the mesa biome, a sled and campfire setup as well as an igloo in the taiga, some tree houses and a small jungle temple in the jungle biome, at least my rendition of it. You get the idea. I built a bunch of stuff all over the island. And it was at this point when I started to plan the route around where I wanted to go with the roller coaster. So I figured out the path it was going to take, and then I very tediously went round and timed all of the rails so that it would be not too fast but not too slow, and stop at certain points and speed up at others, and kind of like slow down so you could see the surroundings when I wanted you to. It took a really long time basically, and I did all that and found out it kind of changes depending on the blocks nearby. It took a while to get the actual roller coaster paced how I wanted it to, but it was worth it. And if you want to see the full on-ride video, you can check out episode 49. But I gotta say, riding this around for the first time was really fun. It definitely felt like all the hard work had finally paid off. And then came episode 50, which if you're reasonably good at maths, you might be able to realize that's a multiple of 25, meaning it was a world tour. So I don't really have anything to catch you up on there because we've already just been through it all. So there we go. That was a recap of the 2000 days I've spent in my Minecraft world. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this. It was something a bit different, and I understand this video is probably very, very long, so I hope you guys didn't mind listening to me ramble on for too long. But it was nice for me to go back and kind of watch through all of the videos, and hopefully you guys got a good supercut and glimpse of what it was like to actually watch them all at once in one whole video. I do very quickly just want to say before we end off the video here, it's not really an episode, I'm not going to count this as part of the series, but I did just want to say that episode 51 will be coming at some point in the future, but I'm planning on changing things up a little bit with how I make my survival episodes. Nothing major, I'm just going to kind of tweak a couple of things, and the main thing I want to highlight for you guys is I probably will change how I portray them with the thumbnail and the title. I'm not sure I'm going to include the episode number or the fact it's actually a survival episode. So all I'll say is just keep your eye out for videos that maybe look like something I would build in my survival world. That's the best I can do for now without giving too much away. But yeah, thinking of trying something new and just changing things up a little bit. I just wanted to give you a heads up so you don't miss it in your subscription feed. But thank you guys ever so much for watching, and thank you for the continued support. It is always greatly appreciated, and I will see you in the next video whenever that may be. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.